Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. My name, as you can probably see on the screen, is Ian Ellington. I'm the president of Manchester TUC that's hosting this meeting. We've got some great speakers with us this evening, and we'll hear from them first. We also want to make sure there's some really practical actions that come out of this meeting. So after the speakers, the plan is to have a decent chunk of time in breakout groups to discuss specific aspects of how we deal with Black Lives Matter at work. We've got 6 breakout groups suggested, and John Morgan, who's co-hosting this with me, will paste the list of those in the chat box. And during the course of the speakers, it'd be really helpful if you could type the number of the chat box, type in the chat box the number of the breakout group you would like to join. And then when we get to that point in the meeting, that will help John to allocate you correctly to the right breakout room without causing too much delay. Without further ado then, let's get on to our speakers. Now, we did have a speaker promised from Manchester March. I'm not sure, are they here? If so, could they indicate? I'm not seeing anyone indicating. So in that case, let's go on to our second planned speaker. Maybe they'll join later on, which is Sohayalla Wilson from Unite at Manchester City Council. So would you like to speak for 5 to 10 minutes, Sohayalla?
Hi everyone, my name is Sohayalla Wilson. I work for Manchester City Council. I'm currently the senior steward for the City Council, Manchester City Council and local public services branch. Okay, so just a bit about me. I actually began my role in about 2017. I'm actually at the moment the only BAME. I consider myself to be politically black, so I'm just going to say politically black and BAME senior trade unionist at Manchester City Council. There's not many people who look like me who are trade unionists in local authorities, and in terms of Manchester City Council, those who we call have stand down, which is that they're allowed to do just sole trade union duties. Again, I'm the only BAME person, and basically people like me come around once about every 10 years or so. So it's that cycle at the moment in Manchester City Council. In terms of the City Council, in terms of Black Lives Matter, of course, everyone's seen that, you know, the City Council is very much pro Black Lives Matter. They lit Central Library up purple. You know, they lit up, I think it was Wythenshawe Hall as well, purple. So, and then, you know, of course, platitudes are being made on social media by councillors and so on. But if you look at the statistics of Manchester City Council, I think the most recent survey said that so 1/3 of all of Manchester City Council's residents are either BAME or they were born outside of the UK. But if you look then at the statistics of the City Council, we only employ 19% who would be traditionally seen as being BAME. In terms of that, there's very much a glass ceiling in terms of the majority of those people are paid no more than a grade 6. So again, in terms of that, so for a grade 6, that's just under £25,000. Again, the majority of people are even paid a lot less than that. They tend to be at the grades 1 to 3 levels, and they make up your cleaners, your carers, in terms of that. So what this means for me is when I come to a meeting about decision making, I'm normally the only BAME face in the room. Okay, so I hear a lot of the time it'll be about, well, we're going to do this to this department. X number of people are going to, they could lose their post, but they're going to be moved somewhere else. So there's a lot of that goes on. And of course, there's a lot of decision making about what's going to actually happen for residents in the city. Now, the fact that Manchester City Council is not representative of the general populace, again, leads to issues. And I don't know if people know Roger Klein's report, Snowy White Peaks. It's a seminal report which says basically that if your decision makers are not reflective of your communities, that will lead to poor decision making. And I think that's something that has been seen most recently when it comes to COVID, the disparities that emerged in terms of BAME people, not only in terms of the death toll, but also in terms of services and relief. One of the things that's like we in Unite were involved in was actually setting up food support networks, not that we should have to set them up, but we set up food support networks, but we had very much our angle was very much for people from non-white British backgrounds and their food, well, so like, ethnic food, so in terms of like making sure any warm food that we did was halal, or any foods that we had were culturally appropriate. And yeah, in terms of Manchester itself, I think there were a couple of times when foods were given that weren't appropriate. Going back to in terms of what that means for the individual, and of course, I'll be joining I think it's group 6, which is local authorities. In terms of sort of like my day-to-day job in Manchester City Council, a lot of my cases do deal with racism, okay? It's not just a case of disciplinaries, but it's also a case of when BAME people have had their, when they basically are frustrated enough in terms of grievances as well. And those grievances are not just about sort of like being racially abused, but it's also things like, why have I been overlooked for this job when I'm the most qualified person for it? And I have had cases where people have gone, yeah, you maybe should have got that job. And of course, there's also been cases of racism where people have gone, I don't want to work for Manchester City Council anymore, and they've walked out. And of course, you won't hear about it in the newspapers because most of the time those things are settled and then people leave. So you've got a lot of confidentiality agreements. Also, in terms of the trade unions as well, one thing that we were noticing was disproportionate action against BAME people in terms of disciplinaries, in terms of who would take grievances out. In terms of the disciplinaries, for example, if you come from a Black heritage background, you're more than even though they only make up something in the region of about 12% of the workforce, you're 3 times more likely to go up for a disciplinary charge. Now, of course, there are certain reasons, when you break down the figures, of course, the response is, well, there's certain reasons for that, because these charges may relate to cases in social care or children's services where the threshold for gross misconduct, because it relates to safeguarding, is a lot higher. But what we found in Unite, and particularly in Unite, was, again, we could see patterns emerging, and especially in those disciplinaries, because most of the time, 95% of the time, it would be a white manager who's brought a BAME person up on a charge of disciplinary. And sometimes it was a case of, why are we here? This is so minor. Why aren't you actually just being a manager and just manage the situation rather than going towards, oh, well, yeah, I've got to follow procedure. Those are those questions. So we raised those issues from about 2018 onwards. And what happened was HROD, which is our HR, they actually recognised some of the issues that we were raising and commissioned a report. I don't know if people read about it in the Manchester Evening News, where it did find that in terms of recruitment, in terms of disciplinaries, in terms of grievances, and in terms of the whole like employee relationship, Manchester City Council was found lacking by the independent author who was commissioned to do the report. And when I say lacking,
just one more minute, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks. Sorry. So we've had a report done, and in terms of that report, yeah, Manchester City Council has been found lacking. We still maintain that there's issues around institutional racism. The report author said that because they'd commissioned the report, he couldn't really call them institutionally racist. But we are now coming together to start work on the report's implementation. And then hopefully, so like in terms of this, we will begin to see change in Manchester City Council. So that's that then, because I think it was a 10-minute allocation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful to get a picture of some of the nitty-gritty stuff going on in workplaces and how people are challenging it. Let's move on to Ian Taylor from the Communication Workers Union. Ian.
Right. Yeah. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for the invite. I'm gonna set my timer because I'm notoriously poor at keeping time, but I want to try and make this brief contribution as brief as possible, so there's sufficient time for some of the other stuff that you want to cram into the evening. So what I'm going to try and do is probably cover off three areas in my contribution, and delve into some of the areas beneath those three separate headings. So one, why Black Lives Matter is actually a trade union issue. I think it's an important subject matter to cover off. Secondly, try and cover off what we're doing, the CWU, Communication Workers Union, are doing, and some of our strategies going forward, including, which I think is really important, committing some resource to this rather than, merely making platitudes. And thirdly, a little bit about what it is we're trying to achieve as a union in terms of some of the things we're doing. So firstly, the issue as to why we believe Black Lives Matter in the workplace, because it's our view, and it's a simple one, is that it is a trade union issue, because not least of all, as the last speaker has pointed out, that the discrimination still exists within the workplace. And without rattling off a load of statistics, the evidence is clear that we still have a ways to go in terms of tackling discrimination in the workplace. Even if we just looked briefly at some pre-COVID unemployment figures, it would show that actually getting a job in the first place is probably twice as difficult for some black and Asian people in the first place. And I also think, touched on by the last speaker ever so briefly, is the trade union movement itself probably has to get its house in order on some of these issues. So I think it is no area is taboo in terms of dealing with racism and prejudice, but it most definitely, in our view, is a trade union issue, and the union does have a significant role to play, if not a duty, in addressing inequality. To be fair, the trade union has always had this responsibility, but has not always lived up to expectations. So when we try and address possibly this lurch to the right in what has been labelled our traditional northern working class areas, in my opinion, this lurch is in part a failure of the trade unions to effectively deal with racism and to deal with it as the divisive social construct that it is. I think the trade union's failure to inadequately articulate the fact that that racism has its roots in economics and continues to be played out in the wider political debate and affecting our relationships today is part of the problem. I think, in effect, our ability or our inability to galvanise working class people needs to be addressed by the trade union movement, and this won't happen by hoping racism goes away if we don't talk about it, because sometimes it's a difficult conversation, and it's for that reason I think the CWU believes it's the conversation needs to be taken out and it needs to be had amongst its members. And I think that's the difficult part of this conversation, is taking it into the workplace and having it amongst your members, because it's only when this happens we'll be able to control the narrative and start to affect change. So part of what we believe needs to happen is start the dialogue amongst our membership. One of the things we have done, so what has the CWU done? We tried and we had a open Facebook session where we probably got 8,000 members logging in to that conversation to try and deal with the difficult subject matters around racism in the workplace, around Black Lives Matter and the emerging movement, and what it means for working people, and what it is and why it's relevant for the workplace. But we did so in the full understanding and based on partly that not all our members share trade union values, and I think that gets overlooked quite frequently. And that's why we believe it is in the workplace having those difficult conversations around the current climate and around Black Lives Matter and around racism and how it affects us in the workplace is necessary. Because the truth of the matter, you know, when you have these conversations and you're part of the workplace, is that we undoubtedly have members who voted Tory at the last election. There's this view that, you know, your members are all Labour card carrying members, and quite frankly they're not. So our view, as I've already said, is to take the debate into the workplace, and just how we do this is part of the issue. So what we have done is we've teamed up with Kick It Out. We believe sport is probably a great vehicle for opening up this debate, because there's always been a contradiction between, you know, the hero worship of Black sporting people and those people who we would probably categorise as having, amongst those people who we'd probably categorise as having extreme right-wing politics. So we think sport is a good place, and to be fair, in football, I think sport has stood up and being counted at the moment in terms of Black Lives Matter. So what we've done is we've teaming up with Kick It Out, because we believe they're an education-based organisation. We've bought some shirts, some football shirts, so I'm doing a bit of advertising of some of the things we've done. We've sold over 900 of these shirts that we've put together. And we've started a campaign called Kick It Out. We've invited high-profile speakers from the footballing world and the sporting world. We'll be getting them into our workplaces and having debate and starting an education programme amongst our members. You may or may not have seen on Twitter a large number of high-profile footballers, Brian Robson, Viv Abdinson, and various social media platforms wearing our football shirts. So, you know, I'll be plugging them. You know, they're on sale. Much of the proceeds, a part of the proceeds, will be going to raising race awareness in the workplace and within the trade union movement itself. So we would also be making links. One of the things we've decided to do as a trade union is we believe we've got to make some links with some of the community groups, including those that are dealing with the legacy of the Windrush scandal, and to start embedding trade unionism in the community, and assisting with some of that work towards affecting real change. So it's really a big approach, both within and without the workplace, that we believe we've got to start influencing hearts and minds in terms of the debate. So really, you know, preaching to the converted, you know, is usually quite easy. It's getting out there amongst some of the disaffected, amongst some of the disaffected communities, and getting that message out there about racism and why it's important to tackle racism and what it is we're trying to achieve. Because I think it's very important that we don't lose the momentum that's currently been built up. There's been some magnificent demonstrations in Manchester, and it's the composition of the people demonstrating has been quite impressive. The age group, it's been young, it's been multicultural, it's been peaceful, it's been constructive. I don't feel we should lose that momentum. And I think one of our objectives is to probably replace some of the hardwire inequality within our society by hardwiring of the trade union values into every community.
Start to wind up, please, Ian. That'd be great.
Yeah. And so we believe by going out into the workplace and going into the communities, that we will be able to start to have, my time has just gone off there, right? We'll be able to have the appropriate conversation. And I believe achieving the understanding that it is a trade union imperative to deal with these issues within and without the workplace will start to affect real change. So really, that's just my brief message. Thanks for listening. Sure, I'm preaching to the converted, but I think the overarching message has to be is what we're going to do practically.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. That's really helpful. And you know, the point you make about the inspiration that the Black Lives Matter movement's given, you know, the fact that we had 15,000 people out on the streets of Manchester, despite the lockdown and despite the additional, you know, threats to the health of Black and other ethnic minority people from the coronavirus, you know, it was really inspiring. And clearly the movement is managing to force change upon all kinds of people and organisations who'd resisted it. People are agreeing, and organisations are agreeing to do things they said would never happen. And I think the other point that Ian raises that we want to try and tease out in the various breakout groups is that we're talking not just about people's individual attitudes and ideas, but about structural issues and about institutional racism, and how we make sure, if we're going to get lasting change, rather than allowing organisations to kind of blackwash what they're doing and you know, say they're supporting Black Lives Matter while continuing with exactly the same policies that led to many of these problems in the first place, then we have to get those conversations and changes happening at workplace level, and that's really what this evening's all about. So we're going to try now to move people into the breakout rooms. Right, welcome back, everyone. Hope that was useful. Certainly from some of what I can see typed in the Google document, it sounds like some of the groups had useful discussions. Want to open it up now for just open discussion. Any questions people have got, any points people want to raise. Particularly keen to hear from Black comrades and other people of colour. So if you want to speak, if you use the raise hands function in the participants box, that would be great. If you can't do that, you could try typing in the chat box, or maybe just waving at me on the screen, and I'll try and call people in. So I'm seeing Narudin first of all. So are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. I just want to say I'm not affiliated with any unions, but I just want to those of you who are affiliated with unions, can everybody hear me all right? I just want to ask because obviously racism is a very structural, systematic thing, and a lot of it is about process, and it's also about individuals that carry out this racism, and whether they're conscious or not, who carry out the white supremacist agenda. I just want to ask how many of the unions, and especially senior management and the leaders of the unions, have gone for anti-racism training, specifically anti-blackness racism training?
Thanks. Thanks for that. I don't know whether there's anybody on the call who'd be able to give you a factual answer to that. I mean, certainly anti-racist training of some sort is quite common inside unions, but I'm sure it'll vary a lot between them. Who else would like to come in?
Can I just say to that point that if you have somebody who's racist, who is in a position in the union, just going to an anti-racist training thing is not going to change their point of view. They're still going to have that point of view. The only thing that will be added is that they've got information about not being racist, but that's not going to change them as a person. It needs to be more about the structures to ensure that racism cannot be kind of like used as a tool within organizations. So it has to be more organizationally based. I don't know how, but that's my opinion.
Nuruddin's, do you want to come back in again? There's nobody else.
Yes, sorry, I just want to come back to what Lorraine said. No, but what would happen then is that if people, I mean, I don't know what's in people's hearts. So if somebody's racist and they've then undertook some training, anti-blackness, anti-racism training, they then would be asked to how to look at their organization, and other leaders will be able to see the practices, so that people will know, and whoever's in the union will know, that this person has gone on the training, and that the fact that they've not changed anything in the way how they're treating people, and how they're using the systems and the processes to disadvantage somebody who's black, maybe, then it's for everybody to see.
Thanks. Could I just ask, if people aren't speaking, it would be really helpful if they could keep on mute. I'm trying to mute people if they accidentally unmute, but it not only gets some background noise, but it will make the view flick over to whoever's got their mic unmuted as well. So who'd like to come in next?
I'd like to come in. Elliot,
go for it, yeah.
Just a quick one again for the unions in particular. I'm quite keen to see that the unions put in place some sort of means of how, going back to Nuruddin's point, how they're going to measure the change in behavior of the organizations which are systematically racist. How are those systems going to be changed, and how we monitor that change so that the behavior becomes quite evident that it's gone from one position to another? Because unless we've got some means of how you hold people to account for making those changes, we'll be talking about this subject over and over again, and the unions will probably carry on assuming they're doing a good job without having any means of how they, changing things.
Thanks, Elliot. I can see Paul and Evan.
Thanks, Ian. I just wanted to raise something quite concrete and recent in Greater Manchester. A couple of weeks ago, there was an incident during a Burnley Man City game where somebody had paid for a plane to fly All Lives Matter banner across the stadium, and there was quite rightly a lot of outrage about this. And the young man who was concerned, who was a welder in an engineering company in Burnley, his girlfriend, interestingly, refused to submit to racial race sensitization training in her job as well, and they both lost their jobs. And in a lot of ways, that's a good result. But what I would have liked to see happen is I don't know whether the company where he worked was organised. It would have been a much better result if Unite could have got together with his workmates and said, look, you've let us all down here and we're not prepared to work with you anymore. We're not racist, we're Burnley fans. We've got black fans, Asian fans, white fans. We don't want to work with you anymore. And from that point of view, that would have been working class solidarity, trade union solidarity, kicking him out of the job, as opposed to what it looked at, to be honest, a little bit of me, I think the term was used a bit earlier on tonight, about blackwash, where the Manchester establishment, all the great and good around Manchester, you know, the big bosses and the city bosses and the football bosses, are saying, oh, what's racism, terrible thing. But they're not actually prepared to fight it. But just at the moment, you know, they're joining in on a little bit of a bandwagon. But that just really reflects, I think, the work that we still need to do in the trade union movement to make sure that, you know, that doesn't happen.
Thanks, Paul. I've got Evan next. If other people want to come in, if they could indicate, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Nuruddin asked what's actually a really good question. I actually don't think on one level it was the best question, right? Because I think it puts in a sense it puts the tail before the horse or whatever. Because actually the biggest problem for me as a trade unionist, as the affiliations organizer for Manchester Trades Council, who's actually, and Manchester Trades Council as a whole, we're trying to do our best to get more and more and more working class people to actually join trade unions. And one of the biggest problems at the moment is the low level of trade union organisation, of membership, right? And particularly low level membership from the most exploited sections of the working class. And the reality is that black and ethnic minority people are massively overrepresented in the most super exploited. That's the reality. You know, you want to see trade union leaders who understand about black people's problems, who understand about racism. You need to see more. We need to see more black people, more black leaders in the trade union movement. And I hate to say it, but one of the biggest ways you're going to get that is more black people, more black working people joining the trade union movement. Right? And I know that might seem like a chicken and egg, cart before the horse or whatever argument, but the bottom line to me is, right, the trade union movement does not at the moment, right, and I speak as I say, as somebody who is a committed trade unionist, somebody who's doing their best to help try and build the trade union movement.
Can you bring
we don't have enough members, and we certainly don't have enough super exploited, i.e. over proportionately black people in the movement, and that's what needs to happen. People, you know, we need more of you in the trade union movement. So please think about joining. Yeah.
I've got Lorraine as indicated next.
Hi, I'd like to speak to that point.
Hi, I've not got a good history with unions. I wouldn't, as a black woman, put my faith in unions supporting me when it comes to a point of being supported by a union. I've got to be honest. I'm going to be totally honest. I was a member of Unison for a couple of years, and an issue was raised whilst I was working in people referral units. I wasn't treated very well, and I moved from one union to another. So I'm still with GMB, but I've got to be totally honest, the union wouldn't be the first place for me to go if I needed support with regards to racism.
Thanks, Lorraine. That's really sad to hear, but unfortunately too common, you know, from black workers, from women, from white workers and men as well. And, you know, unions are extremely uneven. So you can get unions in particular workplaces or particular offices or reps who are fantastic, and others are absolutely dreadful. And that means people having really bad experiences, and those disproportionately affect people who are the victims of discrimination as well. Was somebody else trying to come in when I called Lorraine? Sorry,
It was Lauren.
Lauren, could you come in now?
Sorry, I thought you said Lauren. Sorry, Lorraine. With the point about needing more Black people within the trade unions, that's definitely a good point, but I feel like it's the same issue that we're having in all of the institutions. We need more people of colour in them, and we know the reason why we're not in them is because there needs to be huge culture changes within them. You can't continuously ask people who are underrepresented and oppressed to join a space which doesn't cater for their needs and doesn't actually give them a seat at the table. So I feel like first, what the union needs to do is look at structural reform, culture change, and actually creating an environment that fosters good relations between people of colour, specifically Black people and white people. You need to look at creating an environment that they actually want to work in before you ask them to come. Because even if you see a spike in numbers of Black people, you're likely going to see a very large turnover of Black people as well if it's not an environment that actually centres them.
Thanks, Lauren. I'd also add that historically there have been quite a number of Black communities that have been well represented in the ranks of unions, in fact had higher proportions of people in unions than white workers, but still have been underrepresented when it came to reps, to conveners, to union officers and to union leaders. So even when people have joined unions, that hasn't necessarily been reflected in the way that the unions have operated, and that's something absolutely we need to tackle. Annette.
Yeah, I was just going to make a very similar point and just agree with what you said, Lauren. I think, you know, we've got to sort ourselves out. If we're white people in trade unions, we have to sort ourselves out, and we have to listen to the issues people are bringing to us. And we might have to listen to the issues people are bringing to us, even if they're not prepared to join the union. If the reason they're not prepared to join the union is because the issues they're bringing to us are not being dealt with. And also, once people do join the union, they need to be able to get fully involved in it. And in a lot of organised union branches, what that actually means is that some people have to step aside from some of the positions that they're in to allow other people to have that opportunity. And I mean, I think that's something we should always be doing anyway for younger people and people with different personal characteristics. But I think I'm not in a majority of union reps in thinking that that's what we should do. But we have to include people. We can't just ask people to join and pay the money and not be fully involved in what we're asking them to join. So yeah, I thought your point was great, Lauren.
Ian, are you trying to get in? Yeah.
Just really quickly, because the points have been very, very well made in terms of creating that environment. Well, I think that last point is pretty crucial, by the way, because trade unions in terms of positions, my experience, have tended to be dead men's shoes, and people don't choose to move over and foster and create that environment which probably endears itself to more Black people joining and feeling as though their opinions and their positions are being valued. My overall thought process, though, is that you're better in than out, because I can only talk from my personal experience, is that people are better in than out, because we tend to be more vulnerable in the workplace. And I think it's very important that there is some form of collectivism, whether that's by forming sections within and under the umbrella of the trade union, of probably Black sections, whatever you want to call it, where I feel that you're better in balance, you're better in than out. My experience of helping and being in a relatively senior position and helping Black people and seeing Black people encouraged by seeing me in that place tells me that it's probably better in than out, but there needs to be more of us. Them points are well made. I wouldn't think that the best option would be to be outside the tent, to be fair. So I would encourage people to join and engage in the struggle from within. Much better, much stronger position.
Jackie?
Hi. Yeah, I agree in particular with what Lauren was saying. And I think I've heard a lot about what the problems are and the challenges are with the union and the experiences of Black people in the union. And what I would like to hear is what the unions are going to do going forward to improve the representation of Black people, to improve the experiences of Black people who are members of the union, specifically kind of what the responses are to Black Lives Matter. Yes, there's a space for a conversation around Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. Black Lives Matter is specifically, you know, it's relating to the experiences of Black people, what happened in terms of Black men in particular of the African diaspora. And I want to hear more about what the unions are going to do about those specific issues.
Thanks, Jackie. Nuruddin's wanted to come back in again.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on Ian's point and Lauren's point as well. Just in terms of like the representative, you put Black people in high places is never going to solve racism. Racism at the heart of it is a structural, it's institutional, and it's the processes that are just, everything that is great is white and everything that is Black is not, needs to be questioned. So having Black representation in unions and in workplaces is not going to solve that, because in these organizations, Black people have well struggled racism within that same organization. And the point that what I was making about the anti-racism training is that within that, if senior management, and if they had really good hearts and they were good human beings, let's say, and they would see that they would have to do an audit of their organization within anti-racism training, there is things that you can do in terms of looking at yourself structurally, like what Lauren said, and changing those. And then saying we are clearly an anti-racist organization, and this is how, and what Elliot was pointing to as well, measuring how anti-racist you are. To me, the idea should not be how anti-racist you are, is that it's your organization, it's your union, it is your workplace, it is a white supremacist workplace. That is the thing that we have to comment on. Is it, what are you doing to, how much of your work is practicing white supremacist ideology? And I know that some people might think, oh, white supremacists are not just ones who wear hoods, you know what I mean, or marching. White supremacists is everything that, because the point what we have to understand is that racism is not Black people's problem or any other minority or any other group that's marginalized. Racism lies at the heart of institutional structures and the people who are in power of these white organizations and white institutions. That's the problem. That's where the problem lies. It's not our problem. And I just wanted to make that clear. Apologies.
No need to apologise for making important points. Lauren.
I'd just like to speak on that. I think that's a very good point. And also, as like we're already aware, as you just said, that our institutions are racist and it's like deeply rooted, but you also have to look at the individuals. So it's individuals that run these institutions. We make the decisions. So you can't think, oh, we're just trying to change the institution. You also have to think about changing yourself and your colleagues, because it's individuals and it's human beings who make the decisions, who maintain white supremacy. And like you were saying about white supremacy not being people that carry around pitchforks and wear hoods, white supremacy is literally seeing something racist and deciding to do nothing about it, because otherwise you'll lose the power that you have in the room, specifically your racial power. So that in itself, even small things like that and microaggressions, they're also holding up white supremacy and exhibiting white supremacy.
So there's an interesting, I think, discussion opening up here about the relationship between the kind of structural factors, you know, things like training, things like representation, and I'm guessing also a little bit about what unions are, because there was questions about, you know, what are unions going to do about this, and this comes up not just with issues of race, but with, you know, issues of job losses, or, you know, much more bread and butter issues as well. And of course there are different images of what a union is, from being a group of people in a workplace who agree to stick together and back each other up, to being this big institution with millions of pounds and a general secretary and all these kind of things. And when we've got a group of people like this together, some of whom are union members, some of whom are union activists, some of whom are not union members, some who work for unions, people have different levels of capacity to take action. It'd be great, I don't know, from some of the groups, if there were specific action points that came out, it would be great to get those aired in the room as a whole. Amy.
Yeah, I mean, Lauren just mentioned in our group, Free Black University, which I think is really useful. And maybe if someone could share a link to that, that would be great. I think it's still under development, but it's going to hopefully launch sometime this autumn. I wanted to say, in terms of that exact issue about unions, I mean, I can only speak from my current experience in the UCU, although I was a member of the Teamsters Union in the US before. Issues of exploitation and oppression in the workplace overlap very, very strongly with racial issues in our union. So when our union as a whole, when national leadership doesn't want to go to bat for most precarious workers, those are Black workers, right? There's like a huge overlap between which workers get the worst contracts and how many of those workers are Black, Asian, minority ethnic, female, etc. And so I do think it's difficult because we essentially have like a class divide in our own union between the more permanent members of university staff, and then the more precarious members. But the argument that we've always had to make is basically that we are that what they're going to try to do with us is what's going to happen to the more permanent members. I mean, in as much as attacks on our jobs, which we're facing right now, are very quickly turning into attacks on the more secure permanent members' jobs. So even if it seems counterintuitive, it's people who are in the position of being minorities in the workplace who really are fighting for everyone. You know, like, we are the ones who are fighting for everyone's, you know, jobs. And, you know, it's the more permanent members with the more secure positions who seem to only be fighting for, you know, members like them who are white and who have had these positions for years. So really, it's making the case that what happens to the most exploited workers is a fight for everybody. And we have to kind of constantly be making that argument to the more white and more secure, et cetera, members of the union, and making sure that that's clear. Because I think it's very obvious that, you know, the fractionalized staff and the casual staff, what happens to us is going to happen to them, but just later down the line.
Thanks, some really important points, and that's the case right across the economy, isn't it? I mean, if we look at sectors that have been really badly hit, like hospitality, huge proportions of Black and ethnic minority workers in there, many on casualised contracts, not unionised, and so on, and absolutely at the forefront of you know, where jobs are being cut and hours are being cut in the current crisis. And you know, unions need to be organising those workers if we want to be speaking for the class as a whole. Elliot.
Just a quick one, going back to what Lauren said. In most organisations, the reason why we end up with them being institutionally racist is that the leadership in those organisations, executive boards, etc., are prepared to turn a blind eye to many issues that are going on. And therefore, whilst we look at the structures and the systems that are in organisations, it's critical that we understand that it's people who are often at the heart of that. And therefore, executive boards, etc., do need to be a light shone on them so that their behaviours isn't one that perpetuates throughout the rest of the organisation. So quite important issue around the leadership and the people in positions who are by themselves, their behaviours are critical to the way a whole organisation then behaves.
Thanks, Elliot. John?
Am I audible? I wasn't very audible in the chat room before.
Just about, you're slightly Dalek-like, but we can hear you.
Oh dear. I'll keep it short then. Just to say, there's some really important points to make for everybody. Just one point, not sure exactly it should be a priority. Reflecting on some things that I've heard, I think go back to some very basic stuff around monitoring. It was the first issue I picked up when I was working to Sohayalla.
John, to be honest, it's pretty difficult to hear what you're trying to say. Can I suggest you type in the chat box if that's okay instead? Because I think more people will grasp the point you're trying to make. So just on the auditing point that was raised earlier, I did post in the chat box as well. The TUC, Trade Union Congress nationally, has had a policy for some years of doing equality audits every couple of years, which are published. So I'm not in any way claiming that this means that that's is sufficient for addressing the issues, but there is at least an attempt to identify the scale and scope and nature of those issues and track whether progress is being made, but clearly far more needs to be done. Okay, well, just to wrap things up then, obviously, because people have registered for this, we can email out with the notes of the that people have typed in the document during the breakout session as well. If you want to go on the mailing list for Manchester TUC, we obviously won't spam you as a result of having attended this meeting, but if you'd like to join our mailing list, I'll post the link in the chat box and we can include that in the email that goes out as a follow-up as well. We'd welcome, obviously, any of you that aren't in unions, join one, get involved, help shape that, and similarly get involved with the Trades Council as well. Most of our meetings are open. We'll have open sessions at them where anybody can get involved in those discussions. And as the interesting point, Andrea's posted what I think is some feedback that we've tried to cover too much in tonight's meeting. It would also be helpful, I guess, if people wanted to type any feedback on the meeting in the chat box. It has been a bit of an experiment tonight. We've run quite a lot of Zoom meetings, but we've never attempted to break people up into breakout groups by different topic before. So we've used breakout rooms like randomly allocated, but clearly that didn't go well tonight, and sorry about that. We live and learn and hopefully get better at doing these things as we go. So thanks absolutely everybody for participating. And so if you want to type anything in the chat box with feedback, please do. So good night.